everyone, welcome to today's episode of Wake the Future. Today we are going to be talking about the intersection between philosophy and AI, and this has been something that is top of mind for me, as a few days ago I posted an article on LinkedIn. It came from The Atlantic, basically all around the fact that increasingly philosophers and those with that were philosophy majors, philosophy PhDs, are starting to not only turn their attention to AI, but tech companies in particular are starting to focus more on philosophy-based hires. And I posted this on LinkedIn, and it's like you never really know what the algorithm is going to catch on to. And I started it with, of course, a reference to the best show of all time, Saved by the Bell. Because as I'm writing this whole thing about the resurgence of philosophy, I thought of one of our favorite quotes from Lisa Turtle. What is art? Is art art? Are we art? And whether it was that brilliant quote or the whole idea around AI, philosophy, and ethics, it caught fire. If anyone is on LinkedIn, go check it out. There's actually a fantastic conversation that's happening in the comment section. It's gone viral, and it's something that Jared and I have talked about so much, which is not just like the fact that we are team human, but I always go back to one of my favorite quotes from David Brooks, which is, in an age of AI, major in being human. And I think that there is a spotlight on that right now where, a lot of people who might have thought that they had wasted humanities degrees are now like, all right, there is an urgency around this. So I want to tackle this today from a few perspectives. I want to talk about why philosophy is making a comeback. On LinkedIn, a lot of people were focused on the ethics part of this, which is obviously a huge conversation, but also just the why. Like, why does this matter at this point in time that we're in right now?
Well, first of all, it was great to see that post go pseudo-viral. It's funny. We put all this stuff up, and there's stuff that we're really proud of, and it gets like 3 impressions. And then this, where you open with Lisa Turtle and Saved by the Bell, it takes off. Now,
she's a luminary.
Embedded in there was a great message, and you were just saying, you prefaced something by saying, we talk about this all the time. I thought you were going to say we talk about Saved by the Bell all the time, because we do, because it's one of our shared life passions. But the fact
we
that
also still watch it all the time. People
absolutely.
are like, oh God, I haven't seen that show in so long. And I'm like, oh, it's still TV gold.
We're going to pass it on to our son. A new generation is going to learn to appreciate it. But the funny part about this is that you opened with something kind of like, kitschy like that, and then it led into a more serious post, and that's the one that someone picked up, and now it's gone kind of pseudo-viral. The point that was made in there, I think, is really important to people. I think more people are starting to really talk about this now. And, we've been kind of intimating this for a long time, that there was going to be a resurgence of the, quote, humanities. We didn't know what form it would take, but here we are talking about the philosophy and ethics of AI. It's so hugely critical, and it is a core component of this idea that how are we going to retain not only our humanity in an era of AI, but how are we going to check the AI that we're developing? What are the quality controls we're going to put in? And it's not just technical quality controls. This isn't just a problem for engineers. How do we use it ethically? How do we deploy it responsibly? And oh, by the way, we don't have to think about this, I think, in the traditional context of go to college, get a humanities degree. I mean, I don't think this is aligned anymore with like what you study in higher education. I think this is more about a mindset shift for all of us to start philosophizing more about how we're embedding this stuff in our lives. It's actually really important to think that way.
Yeah, so the one line in that post that a lot of people really gravitated to is the fact that cutting edge is ancient.
Yeah.
And you and I talk all the time, particularly as we developed our framework of A+I, agency and identity, that so much as it revolves around these 2 core pillars are all of these ancient forms of wisdom that have just been lost because of like 150 years of industrialization, right? This is something that we talk about all the time, which is the fact that like it's almost the rediscovery of all of these things that became buried under like modern society. So it was like we were told to be efficient, productive, like optimize the human ecosystem, become more machine-like, and all of these things. And now it's like almost this unraveling where,
Oh, hello.
this unraveling where it's not like we're just learning these things for the first time. We're just rediscovering the things that were always in there. And then it was like for years, education just deprioritized these things, very rooted in pragmatism. Where when you think of kind of the new philosophy, is this kind of the new types of pragmatism? Is AI pragmatism, knowing that a lot of computer science degrees are going to have less value? And we see, it's not like we're at this point in time where it's like, oh, philosophy majors and the ROI on that has it's tripled. It's still a matter of percentage points. It's more just that it's starting to tick upwards.
Yeah.
So, what is the practical part of a lot of this?
I think a couple of things. First of all, humans for millennia have been adaptable. New technologies have come along, things have changed society, and humans have figured out a way to kind of develop and grow alongside those new technologies. AI represents a fundamental difference. It's a paradigm shift. And that's because this isn't a technology, if it goes to its fullest potential, this is not just a technology that does things for us. This is a technology that its boosters believe will be a proxy for us. It'll kind of replace much of what we think of as human. That's a different animal. So that requires different types of thinking. This is not just the next in a chain of historical kind of stepwise evolution.
I saw someone, just to interject real quickly, I saw someone write recently that it's like when each new technology is introduced, it's an extension of. So it's like when the hammer was introduced, that was an extension of the hand. When the steam engine was introduced, that was an extension of our legs.
Yeah.
When the internet was introduced, that was an extension of many facets of our brains. And then he was like, and now AI, and basically the assumption was that is going to be the next link in a sequence.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a lot of faulty reasoning, because then what is it? It's the next extension of facets of our spirituality? No. The next extension of facets of our consciousness? No. Yep. Maybe it's the next extension of parts of our intelligence, which yes, it's getting there. But then these are a lot of the things that I think the value of philosophy is going to start thinking of, because it's not just that next iteration of something. It's not just the next iteration of some facet of our being.
We could broaden this to all the humanities. I think really fundamentally philosophy is what we're talking about. Philosophy and ethics. They're both facets of something which I think to this day are uniquely human. And here's the thing. We've done a macro episode. We're probably going to do a shorter episode in the near future about the fact that, at least my thesis, and I think you generally tend to agree with this, is that intelligence is not the sole differentiator. It's not the primary differentiator between humans and AI. AI can do a lot of things as well, if not better than us already. Many measures of intelligence, AI is going to beat us at. That to me is not a singularity. A singularity is when AI becomes conscious and can match us on our consciousness, and I don't think that's happening anytime soon, if ever. That to me is the human edge.
Yeah.
Consciousness plays in very distinctly, in my opinion, to philosophy, to morality, and to ethics. To be conscious of one's own existence, one's own place with everything else, either with your own species or with everything you're interfacing with, to question your origins, to ask the bigger questions. That's something that I don't think AI can do now. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because we talked earlier about how this post you put up kind of went pseudo-viral, okay? There were comments in there, and they were well-educated comments. I respect them, of people who are like, just like everything else human, AI is eventually going to philosophize better than we do. It's going to beat us at all these things. And I don't buy that. I don't subscribe to the fact that AI is going to be able to out-philosophize us, because that requires a grounding in your own identity, your own consciousness. AI is not there. So this is a very uniquely human construct. And here's the thing. A lot of the episodes we've done already tie into themes like this. Number one of the first things we went to market with when we launched Wake the Future was musical chairs. It was the idea that AI may replace some jobs, it may replace most jobs, we don't know. But even if it replaces some, the music's going to stop and some people are going to lose their seats. And so 20 chairs can go to 18, can go to 16. So how do you stay relevant as a human? How do you preserve your chair? One might be to think along these lines, be a philosopher, be an ethicist.
I also want to be careful not to conflate two things, philosophy and ethics. Ethics is, I think, an offshoot of certain facets of philosophy. For me, at least, again, just going back to this one post, and what I think more than anything else is going to be so critical is more of just the kind of ancient bedrock. Is to go back to the kind of Socratic art of questioning. And for me as a parent, and obviously for you too, like one of the biggest things that we tell our son is like to question everything. And some of the comments under this post were for moms who were like, you know, I'm a Gen X mom, I have Gen Alpha kids. Like I tell their teachers, they're in elementary school, like to be critical thinkers and how to question everything, particularly at a time, right? Where, you know, this is one of my biggest soapboxes, and this is one of the major facets of AI and the new human frontier, which is around what happens when the boundaries between real, fake, true, and false start to blur. How do we navigate that if we're not going back to almost like Socratic reasoning, where we're like, does this make sense? If this is true, like if X is true, does it necessarily mean Y is true? And like, we just talk about that as critical thinking, but really going back to questioning, going back to just reasoning. Think of our whole gestalt here with Wake the Future.
Yeah.
The whole idea behind it was that we were like, oh my God, things are so crazy out there and people are talking about this in such polarized ways. Like, we need a big effing dose of common sense.
Yeah.
And common sense at the heart of it is reasoning. And that, again, is ancient philosophy. Rhetoric, the art of persuasion. It was interesting because I was running that breakout session for a local business last week, and I broke people out where I was like, it's not about skill sets, it's not about competencies. What are the capabilities that you need to focus on in the next 2 to 3 years? Broke people out, they had their conversations. One group was like, human relationships, trust, empathy, emotional connection, great. One group said persuasion. And I was like, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
And I started talking about ancient philosophy and how we almost need to go so far back in order to rediscover that which matters. But I was like, tell me a little bit more. And it was like, what happens? We talked about this in the escape velocity episode, right? What happens when people actually have dialogues, human to human interaction, are able to debate something in a way it's like what you and I do at home all the time, for better or for worse, right? But it's like almost to have an intellectual sparring partner. And while a lot of that is rooted in some forms of philosophy, these are just human capabilities. Now, it's almost like all of this needs to get normalized. We don't need to talk about it through just the lens of AI ethics. It's more like, if we're going to talk about being team human, these are the things we need to rediscover.
Oh, I mean, wow, amen. How do I follow that? That was...
You don't.
That was great. No, I mean, I agree with the spirit of all of that. I think there's no way I can push back on any of that. But I do think that we also have to be a little bit more pointed in terms of the fact that all of those things that we want to kind of build and retain as part of our unique humanity, a lot of it is going to be shared with AI. So you're talking about persuasion. What's interesting is, I've said for a long time, one of the few white-collar job areas that's not going to disappear anytime soon will be certain roles within sales and business development, because so much is rooted in the cultivation of personal relationships. What's Riz?
That's like, right? That's what Gen Z and that's what Gen Z says, like having charisma.
Having Riz. Oh, I should have known that. Sorry, I need another cup of coffee. Wow, yeah, Riz. So AI doesn't have Riz yet.
Right?
And you can't synthesize.
Jared always makes fun of me. He's like, you don't know any words. Like, you still say things are like rad.
You can't synthesize Riz. I think a lot of people in sales and biz dev, they rely on Riz. They rely on the ability to cultivate personal relationships, trust. Those are things which are not going to be outsourced to AI anytime soon, in my opinion. But I think we have to come back to the fact that all of the things you just talked about, while really important, they're still distinct from the ability to, I think, do the fundamental thing, which you mentioned at the beginning of your comment, which is asking the right questions, putting the right lens on what's happening. And there is going to be a need for that in the workplace. There's going to be a need for that at the enterprise level. When people are vetting those who they think are high value, it's going to be less about quantifiable skills that can basically be farmed out, not just to algorithms, but to artificial intelligence. It's going to be more about your ability to add nuance and perspective in ways that can't be synthesized. And to me, that's the philosophy and the ethics of all of this.
AI can't navigate ambiguity.
No, it cannot.
It doesn't have a sense of lived experience. It has no contextualized awareness. What really, truly differentiates us. And it's not just critical thinking, right? That is one very small piece of this. But I even said it's like, what is our capacity for everything from awe and like the neural changes that happen in the brain when we experience a sense of awe, imagination, wonder, daydreaming, boredom, all of these things where it's like, yes, AI can actually be creative in some ways, and that's a slippery slope depending on how you define creativity. But I think it's kind of this next iteration of. It has no real set like ingenuity, that gut, like it doesn't have gut feelings.
So here's the thing with everything you're saying is that they are not concretely measurable. And because they're not concretely measurable, they fall out of favor with people whose lives and existences, either personally or professionally, are quantitatively driven. They're driven by metrics. We're in a data-driven world. Everything you're talking about is not quantifiable. That's why I go back to this idea that we can't compete with AI on intelligence alone. Intelligence, as it's defined, we might have already lost that battle. And you know what? We have to lose the ego and say that's okay. There are all these other things, everything you just talked about. I mean, the hardware in our brain that kind of links to our quote mind is so complex. It's the most complex thing in the known universe. Trillions of synapses operating at a tiny fraction of the energy level and at many multiples of the efficiency of the most advanced computational technology in AI today. So we don't know how to replicate the human brain or mind. So we can beat the human brain on objective measures of intelligence. But what's all the other stuff that you're talking about? That compute in here is going towards that, and we can't synthesize that.
Well, and that's why I say it's the difference between knowledge and knowing.
Yeah.
So AI excels at deep, specialized, and narrow knowledge,
Right.
which is why, I always say the future will belong more to the generalists and the specialists. AI can be a specialist. The generalist, and this is where philosophy comes in, is in the knowing. And the knowing are all of the things that I just talked about, like using your senses and like your sensory ability and how you navigate the world, how you make sense of the world, your place in the world. We've talked about the fact we have dozens upon dozens of different senses. That is tapping into a sense of knowing. And that, in many cases, is very ancient. And I believe, just to get a little like esoteric here, that we have just numbed, like almost anesthetized our beings to being like to tap into that wisdom. That perhaps one of the like greatest opportunities in this is that we will rediscover all of those parts of us that ancient civilizations were very tapped into, almost like a cosmic consciousness.
Well, ancient wisdom is a thing. A cosmic consciousness, for people who believe that sort of thing, I mean, it's a thing.
Yeah.
And
Did you not like what I said? You're not very snuggly anymore.
I've been snuggly the whole time. I mean, okay. Now, see, was that snuggly enough?
Yeah, that was very snuggly.
We can do a lot more of that. I mean, we're here hanging out. Ancient wisdom is it's cyclical. Like periodically, people come back to it and they're like, there was something there. And you know why there was something there? Because they had, in many ways, simpler civilization, simpler society. They were focused on root things that we lose track of in modern society. So I want to make this concrete. I want to come back to the fact that we have to think about how this is going to play out in the future. Okay? Because again, we can philosophize about philosophy all day long. The question is, what does this mean? And I want to parlay this back to the recent episode we did on Gen Z. And I do think that part of their pushback or their reckoning with all of this and how the world is going to look very different for them than it did for their parents and grandparents is they are going to push forward in this area. They're philosophizing about it right now without putting that label on it.
Yeah.
We're putting a label on it, but really what they're doing, a lot of their cultural struggle, a lot of their personal struggle when it comes to identity and standing out and the anxiety they're dealing with is rooted in coming to terms with what's happening here and trying to make sense of it. And as they get older, I think they're going to push forward in this area. Pandora's box is already open. We're already a good ways down the path of utilizing this type of technology. So now comes asking the right questions and trying to figure this out. I think we're just in the early stages of doing it, but I do think that we collectively are going to be able to do that.
That's why I go back to that question I just asked with meaning and belonging. Like, is it almost an antidote?
Yeah.
Where in times of mass disillusionment and confusion. And the episode that Jared is referring to is we did a whole piece, and we can link it below, about the fact that at college commencements, Gen Z was booing a lot of the speakers who talked about AI because they're like, I didn't ask for any of this. So maybe this is the really powerful counter trend here, that even if they are not philosophy majors, it's more the, not the ethics of, but the ethic of philosophy.
And that's a thing. This has to be...
And we can have that conversation
but
of
this
ethics.
has to be divorced from curriculum in school. Most of the manifestation of this is not going to come through humanities programs in Ivy Towers.
This has been my whole point.
This is going to be
Yes.
something that even for people who've been in their career 20 years, if they want to have one of the chairs in this game of musical chairs, they're going to have to apply this kind of thinking. And that is going to be a skill set. Some people, I think, have it more than others, but it's not something that you can't cultivate. It's using a different lens, asking the right questions, and retraining yourself to do so. How do we do so in a way that is not necessarily going to be perfectly measurable? And how do we get comfortable with that?
There was a study that came out of Deloitte, and this is going back like a year plus, and what Deloitte said was that, yes, there is the growing pillar, the new CEO, so the chief ethical officer, and something you and I have been talking about for so long, and the fact that, like, it needs to permeate across every level of the organization. And there are very few companies out there. And even in this study, they couldn't point really to any company that had this kind of not only ethical framework, but like this underpinning of philosophy, have it go like cut through every single functional area, where it's like we can talk about strategy and innovation. Everyone is like, all right, how do we get everyone on board? This is going to be one of the big areas where people are going to have to get on board. We just are not quite there in our thinking around it.
And listen, I'm also a big believer in acknowledging the counterpoints to what we say. Some of the world's most successful companies right now, in many ways, operate very unethically. We talk about the tyranny of convenience and the kind of pseudo-surveillance state we're in. Some of the most powerful companies out there with the highest market value and that are entrenched in all of our lives are not operating ethically at any measurable level. And we know that. So for us to come here and say this, it's almost counterintuitive given how successful certain companies have been. I think we're going to hit a crossroads. People are going to more carefully audit the companies they buy things from or they do business with on this type of stuff. Do we want to surrender, our cognitive sovereignty, our privacy, our data? These are all questions that people are just starting to ask.
This one really focused on the resurgence of the humanities. It talked about kind of the resurgence of the philosophical method, the things, right, rediscovering ancient wisdom, and we talked about rhetoric and debate and the ancient art of questioning and how these are going to be critical skill sets going into the future. What we did not talk about, and it was by design, was anything around the true AI piece of this, what I would kind of consider even the darker underbelly. Philosophers are coming into tech companies. Is this being used for training data? Is this being used in an effort to make AI much more human-like? Next week, we're going to talk about really the more technical side of a lot of this. And today I really wanted to focus on the people side.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point, there are two different ways we could look at philosophy in this context. Is it being used to enhance the technology, or are we using philosophy independently as an audit of the technology? Very different things, and today we're really covering the latter. I think that a lot of other types of skill sets, career trajectories, they come and go. You could say that in the last couple of 100 years, machinists, people who were heavily involved in the industrial economy, they came, and a significant percentage of them went. Fast forward to 10 to 15 years ago, everyone was being told they had to be a coder to meet the future. Everyone needs to be a coder. Coders have come, they've taken over the world, and you know what? I would argue because of AI itself and AI training itself, in the next 10 years, the vast majority of coders will be irrelevant. That's my thesis. But what's existed for millennia? It's philosophy. And so this is something which is a constant. It might continually take a new form, but here we are talking about it in the year 2026 and what it means in this technological era. Very important conversation. We're only getting started today. So I would encourage all of you to follow subscribe, like, share this, and we want to keep the conversation going. And obviously stay tuned next week and beyond for other topics that are going to be a continuation of this.
Yep, thanks for joining us. Wake
Thank
the
you.
Future. If you enjoyed today's conversation, like, follow, and subscribe to stay ahead of what's next. I'm Erica Orange.
And I'm Jared Weiner. Thanks for waking the future with us. We'll see you next time.